everybody, good morning. This is Pete Malicki for the World Monologue Games Monologue Masterclass number 3. It's great to have you with us. It might not be morning where you are, or it might be very early morning, but it is early on a Sunday morning here in Australia, so pardon me if I look like I'm confused or tired or any of those things. I'm going to dive right in this morning. Today we're going to be talking about intonation and emotion and their relationship, mostly a few other little bits and pieces. And as always, you can put questions in the live chat and I might take a few of those questions at some point, but here we go. All right, so first of all, intonation is, there's lots of definitions. It's a little bit of a confusing area depending who you speak to and what definition you look up. But just to keep it simple, I'm talking about the pitch of your voice, the rise and fall of your voice, the stresses, the emphases that you put on, things along those lines. I think as I talk, it'll be clear what I mean by intonation in case you work with a different definition. So you might be aware that there are tonal languages in the world. So a tonal language is where the rise and fall of your pitch actually changes the word. I don't speak any of these languages. A lot of the Asian languages are tonal. I don't speak them, so I'm not going to try to demonstrate it. But there are languages where if I said apple, 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 that would be 3 different words. In English, it just sounds like I'm saying apple in a different way. So even though English is not a tonal language, the tone, the rise and fall of the tone doesn't change the word itself. It can significantly change the meaning, and it can do quite a lot of other things. So I'm going to talk through what tone can do and how you can use this when you're performing and performing a monologue. A monologue, which was a weird way of saying monologue. So I've accidentally given an example of tone. What I was just about to move on to is that every word has its own tonal patterns. I don't say tonal, I say tonal. The example I usually use is hamburger. A hamburger, just a normal word, but we do say it in a particular way. So there's an emphasis on the hamburger, to slow it down. We don't say hamburger. That would sound a bit strange. Hi, could I please have a hamburger? People would look at you funny. They wouldn't quite comprehend what you're talking about. Now, I should put in the caveat that I'm Australian, so I speak English different to everybody else who's speaking English, arguably worse, but anyway, that we won't go down that road. So tonal patterns are different with different accents, different dialects, different regions as well. So it is a confusing area, but let's keep it simple and let's focus on what is relevant to you as the actor. So what I've noticed in my time as a director and an acting teacher is that weaker actors, the less capable actors, tend to not get tone right. When they do a performance, it sounds a little bit like they're reading. So the tone doesn't sound natural. It sounds a little bit more prepared. You know how if you see someone doing public speaking and they're not comfortable with it, then their tone sounds a little bit funny. It sounds quite forced. It sounds quite formal. Or if you're in a classroom and you're reading aloud from a book, then yeah, the tone sounds different to if I'm speaking naturally. And what you see is a good public speaker sounds very natural, even if they have a script. They might have memorized their script. They might be reading bullet points. They might be reading the whole thing word for word, but they're able to deliver it in a way that sounds quite natural. And that's something that I've seen actors who are less skilled or less experienced struggle with very, very commonly. So I have a script here. Now imagine that I'm doing a performance. My name is Mark Theo Carter, and until recently I lived a completely unremarkable life. The only thing most of you would find interesting about my last 5 years is that I killed 16 people. Now, I think it's obvious to say that that didn't sound natural. That didn't sound like I really meant any of those words, that they were sort of, that I was having a natural conversation with somebody. It felt a lot like I was reading off a piece of paper, because I was. So this is something to be very mindful of. I think tone is a really important area. And if you haven't thought about it before, even if you're a very experienced actor, I'd like to invite you to think about tone and maybe do some exercises. We'll go through some exercises today. Do some exercises where you might have a listen back to your tone, record it, or write out how the tone sounds. Like the example I used a moment ago, hamburger. Write out how you say that word. What are the tonal patterns? So where do you put the emphasis? I say hamburger, hamburger. So I put it on the ham. It sounds maybe like it's not a helpful exercise, but you might find that it really is a helpful exercise, particularly if you're struggling with tone and you can write out the tone of a word that you hear said naturally. Let's say you're watching an interview or a really high quality performance, versus writing out how you do the tone of the same words. Like, you might find that your tonal patterns are different, and it could be because you have a different accent, but it could be because you're not saying it naturally. So let's talk a little bit more about what tone can do. Tone can actually convey the majority of the information that you're trying to convey. I'm sure many of you have heard of the rule, which is a bit approximate, that communication is 93% nonverbal, or something along those lines, a similar breakdown. That the majority of your communication is not your words, it is your tone, it is your pitch, the speed at which you're delivering your words, it's your facial expressions, it's your body language. And I think that is approximate. It's a bit hard to say exactly, but I do think there's a lot of truth in that. I do think that your tone conveys more information about what you're feeling emotionally than your words. So a great example is the words good morning. Now, I forgot to mention, I want you guys to participate along with me today. So whether you're watching live or whether you're watching the recording of this video later, I need you to try some exercises with me. So first of all, let's say good morning happily. What does that sound like? Good morning, you know, I'm happy. It's pretty straightforward. It's how many of us say good morning much of the time. We could be grumpy because it's too early on a Sunday morning and we want to still be in bed, so we might be a bit more grumpy with it. But how could we, what other information could we convey with just the words good morning? How could we convey shock? Imagine that you've woken up and you've gone out into your living room and there's somebody you don't know sitting there on your couch. Good morning. Or maybe you're scared or angry, or you wouldn't say good morning. But it's going to be very different. And how do you say good morning like you really don't mean it, like you're being sarcastic? Like, how do you say good morning to someone you don't like? You really despise them, you don't want to see them. So what you might find helpful is thinking about the setting when you say these words. Now, this is something that I'll bring in for your monologue as well. So if you're saying good morning happily, that's a pretty easy one to imagine. You just can imagine waking up on a good day. What if you're saying good morning with shock? Like I gave that little example, or surprise. With that little example I gave, you need to come up with the reason why you sound surprised. Otherwise, it might be hard to sell. But if you can imagine, all right, I've just walked out of the bedroom and there's this random dude sitting on my couch. Good morning. It's quite easy to do, but I think you'll find that if you don't have the reason why you might say it in a particular way, it's a bit harder to sell. Certainly for most actors, in my experience directing and teaching, I find that when I spend more time talking through the background, the scenarios, it really helps most actors deliver a more convincing performance. What else can tone do? Tone can convey a question or a statement. So if you have a rising tone at the end of the sentence, that can sound like a question, right? How do I ask a question? Ask yourselves a question. Say, do you know where I put that thing? Try saying that and have a think about your tone. You'll notice that most questions end with a rising tone. It's funny, as an Australian, a lot of Australians talk with a rising tonal pattern at the end of the sentence. It's a bit of a thing that people say about Aussies. I don't do that. And of course, you can make it denote a statement. So if you have a falling tone, that often sounds like a statement. And what you'll notice is that confident people, when they speak, tend to have a very clear falling tone at the end of their sentences. They're not uncertain about what they're saying. People who are less certain, or maybe in the setting they're less certain, or they're less confident, they might have that rising tone because they don't want to sound like they know everything. So they make a statement, oh yeah, the banana's over there. And then when they say it that way, it sounds like they're not quite sure. Whereas if you have that clear falling tone at the end of your sentence, it really sounds like you know exactly what you're talking about. I tried to do it just then. What else can tone do? Tone can emphasize the important information in a sentence or paragraph or whatever, the important information that you're saying. So I have this example, the man tripped over the rock, or the man tripped over a rock. So that's just a little piece of information, but what's happening if I say the man tripped over a rock? What happens if I emphasize, if I elongate the word man? The man tripped over the rock. What I'm doing is pointing out the key information that I'd like to highlight. I can clarify something. So perhaps the previous sentence might have been who fell over the rock or who tripped over the rock. And I say the man tripped over the rock. All I'm doing is just putting a little bit of emphasis in a different place, but it does change the meaning. It goes from just a simple statement into more of a clarification. I do see a comment there down the bottom here. I'll just address it. Will this work for film or stage? Either. Doesn't matter. It's just generic communication across any kind of performance or even in real life. These things all are true to real life. So I can also highlight different pieces of information. The man tripped over the rock, and that might be because someone didn't know what he did with the rock. Maybe he, well, I don't know. You tell me. Or the man tripped over the rock. So I emphasize rock, and then we know that he tripped over a rock and not that banana. You can, of course, like that is using emphasis to highlight information. You can just emphasize information in other ways. And if you think about the tonal patterns of different emotions, they actually change quite a lot. So if I use anger, what are some things that happen with my tone? Well, typically my volume gets louder. I am angry now. I might slow down my speech, or I might even get really fast. Either way, they can be manifestations of anger depending on how an individual chooses to do that anger. And there tends to be a lot of emphasis when I'm angry. I'm emphasizing every second freaking word. So it's really quite interesting to see how these things happen. And if you think about the opposite of anger, think about sadness or depression. What happens with your tone? Have a think about it. We see some similarities as well with changes in our body language. So when you're angry, you tend to be more erect. You tend to be stiff. My muscles are tight. there's a lot of things physically going on. You can see that, like, I'm not really trying to commit to feeling angry right now, but you'll see it on their face, the way their faces are, contorted. And yet when someone's sad, something very different happens. Their body language collapses. They lose muscle tone. It becomes physically difficult to stand. Like, there's a bit more effort. So instead of seeing that like really erect posture, we see sort of typically slumped posture, rolled shoulders. We hear a lowering of volume. We might have a deepening of pitch. It just depends on the person there. But there are a number of things that will happen when you feel different emotions. And now when I'm trying to do something a little bit more sad, again, I'm not fully committing to being sad. You could see that there was less variation in my pitch. It was just a little bit more of a monotone, which I think is quite true of most people, if not many people, when they're being sad. It can also like denote an accent or a demographic. So there are certain kinds of people who use certain kinds of speech patterns. I'm not going to give a demonstration at risk of not doing a good job, but I think what you'll find is if you watch a particular demographic, like let's say, absolutely no disrespect meant, let's say you see a working class labourer, they tend to talk in a different way to someone who is has a doctor's degree and works in a university or in government or high up in business or something like that. There are tonal patterns that can help you quickly identify, to some degree of accuracy. Of course, it's always a form of bias and you can't know 100%, but you might be able to identify certain information about someone just from the way they use their tone. And of course, you need to be careful because you might be wrong. They might, maybe they grew up in a certain area and they speak differently to other people. So anyway, I think there's a lot that you can do there, and I'm going to go now into some exercises with tone. I have a sentence that I love to use in exercises, which is this: Stephen put the tray down over there. And what I want us to do now is just to play around with the delivery of this sentence to try to make it mean different things. Stephen put the tray down over there. Now, what's really important and why I like using this example is that you can completely change the way this sentence works by adding a comma. If you add a comma after Stephen put the tray down over there, now it becomes a directive to Stephen. I'm talking to Stephen, I'm saying his name to get his attention or to highlight the fact that I'm talking to him, and then I'm telling him what to do. But if I'm saying, Stephen put the tray down over there, without that pause, without that comma, what I'm actually doing is I'm making a statement about what Stephen did. So it's really important that when you do this exercise, and just in general, that you make sure you're really careful about how you use your pauses and your punctuation, because they can make an enormous difference to the meaning as well. So let's try this sentence and let's see if we can convey happiness. Stephen put the tray down over there. Say that and show us happiness. Now, what might you have done to show happiness there? Would you be just going, oh, Stephen put the tray down over there? Or would you think of a scenario which correlates Stephen putting the tray down with you with you having a reason to be happy? Let's keep going, and I think this will become clearer and clearer. What about surprise? Show me Stephen put the tray down over there with surprise. I hope you're all doing this, by the way, while you're watching. Stephen put the tray down over there with surprise. Now, how can you sell that? How can you make that work better? The way that I would do this is to have a reason why that surprised me. Now, I can give myself a very quick bit of backstory. Stephen has a tray. Where are we? Maybe we're at a dinner party or a restaurant or something. I'm just going to go with a dinner party. And Stephen is not the sharpest tool in the shed. And Stephen went to put the tray down somewhere, and I thought, oh God, he's going to put it in the wrong room. Like he's got the meat entrees, and he's going to put them over in the vegetarian corner. And then I walk out and I see that the tray's in the right place. And I might react in a few different ways to this. It might be relief, or it might be like, Stephen put the tray down over there. I'm like, I didn't expect that. That's kind of cool. Or yeah, let's try relief now. We could use that same scenario and imagine that you're quite sensitive about upsetting the vegetarians. You don't want to put a whole bunch of prawns in front of them. So how would you deliver this now? And it might come out something like, Stephen put the tray down over there. And I might emphasize there, because like there was the right place. He put it over there. Great. Relief. That feels good. I'm glad that happened. What else can we do? How could we do suspicion? It's a bit of a tricky one. How could you deliver Stephen put the tray down over there with suspicion? Can you think of something that would make you suspicious? I'm not going to answer that. I'd like you to have a think about it. What scenario where Stephen's putting a tray down would you feel suspicious about? Because this is what you need to do as an actor. Sometimes it's really obvious what your reaction is, particularly if it's in a conversation. You're just reacting directly to what the other person's saying. But sometimes a lot of the information needs to be generated from within here. You need to understand the context really, really well to deliver the performance in the way that you would like to deliver it. Now, what's also obvious from doing an exercise like this is the amount of room that your interpretation has to change the way you do the performance. So if all I'm saying is Stephen put the tray down over there, I can have 100 different things that I can do with that. I can come up with any number of scenarios or any context that I want to inform the way that I do that delivery. Or typically, like what I see a lot of actors do is that they just say whatever, like they just deliver it in the way that comes off the top of their head. And sometimes that works, but I think it's less likely to result in a really high quality, nuanced performance if they're not doing a process like this to analyze the way that they're saying various things and the context and what it means to them. Like, how are they reacting to it? Why do they feel guilty because Stephen put the tray down over there? Maybe they had, maybe they fired, it was the manager who fired Stephen because he's made a mistake, and then the manager's seen, oh my God, he didn't make the mistake. And I fired him, and I was really nasty to him. So I feel guilty now. Hi, Fernio. Good evening from the UK. Good morning from Australia. So it's a really interesting exercise, and let's just try a couple more. Let's try, I've got a list here, make it a question. So not directed at Stephen. Again, it's not Stephen, put the tray down over there. Stephen put the tray down over there. This one's pretty easy. You could just, why is it a question? Someone could say, oh, he put the tray on the whatever table. And you go, Stephen put the tray down over there? Why did he do that? Maybe that's what I'm thinking. Why would he put the tray down over there? That's not the right place for it. There's lots of different ways to do it. Make it hilarious. Try this. What about making it defensive? Can you make it defensive? What's the reason why Stephen putting the tray down over there, or you saying that, would make you defensive? So I hope you can see, I think that's about enough of that exercise, and I hope you can see that your tone is doing a lot. And the tone is like an output. So that comes out when you're thinking the right thing or reacting to the right stimulus. So in a normal performance with multiple actors, whether it's film or theatre or whatever other format, it tends to be you reacting to other actors. And of course, you need to do a lot more work than just that. You need to establish your character and your baseline, your mood. But you reacting to the other characters, the other humans, the other actors, are your stimulus or stimuli. The way that they're behaving around you gives you something to react off. But if you're doing a monologue, very often there is no stimulus. You might be talking to an invisible person, so you have to imagine that. Or you might just be telling a story in the same way that a keynote speaker will tell a story. They might be recounting a story, but they're not pretending like they're talking to one person. They're talking to a whole room of people. So how do you show the emotions when you're telling that story? And this technique of thinking about what these various things mean to you is how you can do that colorfully, because you create the stimulus in your head. You think of what this means to you and you react to those thoughts. You react to the feelings that they bring up. Now, this is not the only way to do acting, but it's something that I've worked with for a while, and it does tend to work. I want to just demonstrate another point quickly, which is the relationship between your kind of expression, the physical side of emotion, and the tone of your emotion. And what I want you to do is try two things. Let's use that same sentence. Stephen put the tray down over there. Hopefully you've said it a number of times. And now what I want you to do is show the emotion on your face. So pick an emotion. Like, let's do something a bit more easy. Let's start with anger. So pick anger and show it on your face. Like, start to feel that anger. Think of something that's made you frustrated or angry recently and feel that anger and show that anger on your face. Now hide it from your voice while you say, Stephen, put the tray down over there. Now let's try it a different way. Let's try being neutral. So get rid of that. Feels good. And now let's try, without showing any emotion on your face, let's show it in your voice. Say that sentence. And if someone was looking at you, or you're looking at yourself in the mirror, or you can just feel it, both of these are really, really hard because these things are so closely linked. It's really hard to show an emotion and mask it from your voice. That's a little bit easier, but the other way around is almost impossible. To show an emotion in your voice and not physically show it at all, it's just almost impossible. Now, what you can do with this, I'm going to move on to something called story mapping. Talk about this for a few minutes. Story mapping is, well, there's lots of different ways to do it, but we can do it with emotion. So we might even call it emotional mapping. Now, with your monologue, what you can do is break it down and try to write out the emotions that you're going to use. And this might be an exercise that you do in preparation, but it won't be something that you have in mind necessarily when you do the performance. It's to help you break down the monologue and understand it better. So let's say I had an example here that I've removed. Whoops, but I think I remember it. So the example is you have someone who was a budding sportsman or sportswoman, and they had an accident when they were younger and were no longer able to perform their sport. So let's just say that monologue is about them reflecting negatively on this. So it's not a monologue about someone who's kind of come to peace with it. The whole piece, it might be bitter. It might be them feeling bitterness about how they can no longer do the thing that they want to do, the thing that they love. And then, depending on the story, of course, you might break it down. Let's say you have 4 paragraphs, and the first paragraph is talking about how they were when they were training and enjoying their sport. And so that might be done happily. So even though there's a tone of bitterness throughout, we might start a little bit more upbeat. And then the second paragraph might be about a car accident, for example. They've been injured in a car accident. And they could be devastated when they realize that, let's say they were a runner and they've, severely broken their hips and knees and legs or whatever. They can't run anymore. They could be scared because of the injury. Now, let's say the next paragraph is about them getting used to their new life or the rehabilitation or trying, and we see a lot of frustration. And then in the final paragraph, they get a bad prognosis from the doctor. They get told that they will never run again, that the surgery didn't go well. And what might they feel then? They might feel, anger or betrayal. They feel like life betrayed them or whatnot. They might feel disbelief. They might not accept it. They might be a positive person who thought it would becoming. Random thing to say, a positive person who thought that they would get through it. And so, like if that's your monologue, which I doubt it is, because I've just made that up, we're showing these are over the 4 paragraphs, these are the key, this is the key kind of tone that I want to have. But I also, again, I want to have that underlying bitterness that we can sort of sense the whole time. And if that doesn't sound possible, just have a think about when people are telling a happy story at a funeral, or they might be telling a funny story about the deceased, and they might be laughing and they might be smiling, but at the same time they're deeply sad and maybe even crying from sadness whilst laughing from mirth at the same time. So it's definitely possible to have more than one emotion at the same time, even if they're completely conflicting. I think emotions work at a greater degree of complexity than we realize. And then look, you can continue to break that down further. So this is in my hypothetical example, we have a monologue with 4 paragraphs. Why don't you break that down by sentence? So what does each sentence mean to this person? And in this example, when they're running, they're feeling happy. And then when they achieve something, they win a medal or something, they feel pride. They feel proud of their successes. An opportunity comes up. Maybe they get selected for a big, running tournament or something like that, and they feel excited. So, we can make the performance quite complex emotionally, but still very believable, because there's enough information in the monologue, if it's well written enough and has scope for you to do this, that you can create quite a rich performance using different emotions. And then you might be thinking about your tone while you're performing it to show how those emotions come out. So again, thinking in that scenario, why does that person feel happy? Because running is what they love doing, and it makes them feel free, and whatever, you come up with that. It might not be stated in the monologue. It might not say, I loved running because it felt good and I felt free, blah, blah, blah. It might just say, I love running. And you need to do the work as the actor to fill in that background information, to answer the why question. Why do they feel that way? That's something that you will always be doing as an actor. And if you're working with a director, your director might give you that information or give you suggestions, but you should always try to do as much work as possible yourself as the actor. I think it's more likely to lead to a good performance. I'm just going to go through a few more little things today, and then I might take questions. So guys, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in now, and I'll get to them in about in 5 minutes or so once I've gone through this. I have another concept sort of semi-related, called fluidity. And what I mean by this is how fluid are your transitions from one emotion to another. I use this example, and pardon my eyeline moving because I've got my example here. Mario is the biggest jerk in the world and I hate him. He never loved me the way I deserved. Now, the first sentence, Mario is the biggest jerk in the world and I hate him. Let's say we're going to be angry. We'll deliver that angrily. And then the second sentence, he never loved me the way I deserved. let's say that makes us sad, so we deliver it sadly. And what most actors will do, and there's nothing inherently wrong with this, but what most actors will do is they will do that transition in between sentences. They'll say, Mario is the biggest jerk in the world and I hate him. He never loved me the way I deserved. And that's fine, right? That can work. But if you have a fast-moving monologue, like even the one I just described, where a lot's happening and we have a lot of different emotions, if you're doing all of your acting in between the sentences or all of those transitions, it can end up being really slow paced. And I think it's okay broadly if you're doing something. If you're just pausing and doing a look, that's usually pretty pointless, I have to say. But if you're doing an emotional transition, that is written on your face. You can see those emotions shift. And I think the demonstration I just did, I certainly felt it. I don't know if it came out on my face. It would certainly on a good actor, a better actor than myself. But there is something actually going on. Anyway, so that's one way of doing it. Another way is to start to put in a trigger, the thought of what's coming next while you're saying the thing that you're currently saying. And another interesting thing about us humans is that the way that we use our language is very complex and slow compared to thought. So what I mean by that is that what might take us 20 words to explain pops into our head in an instant. We understand what it is. It's just we need to find a way of translating that thing in our head into words, and those words are less efficient than just the idea popping into my head. So it might be like something happens and I see something and it makes me feel a certain way, and then someone says, "Are you all right?" And then I have to sort of explain that in a little bit more detail than just saying, "No, angry." I have to probably even give a little bit of context too. So as I'm saying, Mario is the biggest jerk in the world and I hate him. I already know that I think he's a jerk. As soon as I start talking, that's why I start angrily. And I'm thinking a little bit ahead. We do tend to think a little bit ahead. It's really interesting if you ever, it's a difficult thing to do, but if you ever analyze your thoughts, you do think a bit ahead. You're not just thinking of the words you're saying, you're also thinking about what's coming next. Otherwise, you'll probably stumble over your words quite a lot. So the way that I'm going to do this differently is I'm going to start to think of that sadness that that's coming up, the fact that he never loved me, and how I feel about that while I'm still partway through the first sentence. And what we can do is do that transition much more fluidly. We're not doing it in the space in between sentences. We're doing it as we go. I'm angry. Mario is the biggest jerk in the world and I hate him. He never loved me the way I deserved. And what you see there is that I start angry, but then I'm thinking ahead and I'm thinking about how sad and that sense of loss and whatever else it is that it is making me feel sad. And then I didn't need to use that pause. I didn't need to use that space in between sentences to do that transition. Now, why don't you guys give it a go, and this time try to do the transition later. So why don't you do the transition halfway through the second sentence? So I'm going to read them out again. Mario is the biggest jerk in the world and I hate him. He never loved me the way I deserved. So why don't you put that transition somewhere around he never loved me the way I deserved? Okay, hopefully you did that, and hopefully that worked out for you. It is a bit of a tricky thing and it does take practice, but I think it's a really great skill to practice. Because again, you're not forced to do all of the acting in between sentences, which is often what actors do. And it doesn't tend to look as natural because it's not how we tend to communicate organically. It's really quite interesting when we start to analyze how we communicate. It's quite interesting what you might uncover. And I would strongly encourage you, if you've never done this before, to do it. It's a great way of understanding the human condition better and communication, and that will definitely help you with your acting. Okay, I have just a couple more ideas I might go through quickly. It's been about 40 minutes already, so I'm going to talk about something that I call telegraphing. And telegraphing is where you give information away earlier than you plan to, or not necessarily earlier than you plan to, but it's when you give information away early. It might be a choice that you do intentionally. Have a look at this example. You know what he did next? He punched me. Now, I think it's pretty obvious as soon as I open my mouth and I say, you know what he did next, that it wasn't something good, because I was angry, I was annoyed about it, I was frustrated. And that, to me, that's telegraphing. I am telling my audience, or the person I'm talking to, the other character is an actor that I'm talking to, I'm telling them how I felt about something before I'm telling them what happened. Now, that's not a bad thing. That's probably quite natural in communication. But there's another thing that you can do. You can mask the way that thing made you feel by coming in neutral. And then what we can do is build a little bit of suspense where we just don't know what happened next. So if I say, you know what he did next? He punched me. Now, when I say you know what he did next neutrally, if done well, people will be like going, what did he do next? I want to know, what did he do next? But if I start, you know what he did next, we already know the answer because it was angry. So he obviously did something bad. And through context, probably we can figure out roughly, if not precisely, what he did, depending on the piece. So this is telegraphing, and you can mask it, and that's particularly good to do in comedy. In comedy, you often want to mask the punchline, but if you're telegraphing it emotionally by showing all of those emotional signs, then there's no way you can hide from your audience the way that you feel about it. There's something else that I'm just going to cover one more thing, which is misdirection. And this is where you can trick your audience. You can lead them to think one thing is going to happen when, in fact, something else happens. So what I can do is, using this same example, you know what he did next? He punched me. I'm showing happiness, and our audience thinks, oh, that's nice. What did he do? Did he give Pete a chocolate bar? No, he did something bad. So this is misdirection, where I'm showing something that's contrary to what I might have really felt, because I want to trick the audience. Now, probably a number of you might be thinking, well, hang on, isn't that just lying to the audience? If I'm pretending to be happy about something, but then actually I'm not, I'm upset about it, I'm angry about it. And the answer is yes. Yes, that is lying to them. So you have to do it very carefully. How do you sell this in such a way that's actually going to work? Because if you want to do a believable performance, you're not going to be happy about something that made you unhappy. So how could I do this? Well, I can deliver things neutrally. If I'm just a bit blank about it, I'm containing my emotions. That's perfectly normal. I might do that, in real life communication. Again, you know what he did next, and then I show the emotion. That's totally fine to do. I might be sarcastic, but it might not be quite clear that I'm sarcastic. You know what he did next? He punched me. So I can sort of mask how I really feel about something behind sarcasm, and that might be very obvious if I'm like, you know what he did next, if I'm really big about the sarcasm. But if I sort of pull it down and make it subtle, then I might be able to misdirect the audience to make them think that there was a different outcome coming up, but still, when they see the real punchline, that he punched me, no pun intended, they still believe it. They'll still watch that and go, oh, okay, yeah, that all makes sense, rather than just me being like happy about something because I got why would I be happy about being punched? I'm not happy about being punched. It doesn't make sense. So you do need to definitely do this carefully, and it is quite a skill, and it's always going to be more or less difficult based on the context around it. Another thing to bear in mind is that if you're doing a monologue, you might be performing it as if it's happening in real time. So as I'm saying my sentences, I'm living those experiences. So when I say, you know what he did next? Maybe I'm thinking that I'm retelling this as if it's in real time, and I don't know what he did next. Maybe I was expecting that he was going to do something nice next. Maybe I just thought, due to the context, he was going to give me that chocolate bar. But then he ended up punching me. So I can deliver that first sentence with the genuine, true anticipation as if it was happening to me in real life, in real time. So there are different ways to get around it. And it's a very interesting thing to play around with. Okay, so look, I think that's pretty much all I have to say for this session today. I've got a question. I'm going to jump onto that in a sec. So thank you very much for joining this session. I hope you found that informative. I do have one more masterclass planned for next week, for Saturday the 16th at 10 p.m. Sydney time. And again, I'm changing the time of each of these masterclasses because I want to suit different regions around the world. This is the middle of the night for some people. I saw Sammy was online earlier and it was 2 a.m. I think in Lebanon or Syria. So that's not a good time for everyone. So I'm switching the times around. So the final masterclass is next week, Saturday the 16th at 10 p.m. And I'd like to invite you guys, whether you're watching this now or later, to send me an email with what you'd like me to cover next week. I'm really happy to cover anything, or just make a comment in this video. I'll be seeing those comments throughout the week. So please feel free to get in touch and let me know what content you'd like covered. Just a couple more things about World Monologue Games. So if you're watching this and you don't know about the event, World Monologue Games is a global acting competition. We have 2,200 registered competitors at this point in time from 80 countries around the world. It's super cool. And we're taking submissions right now. So if you're interested in getting involved, what you need to do is register, and we will send you more information and also a link to how you can submit. So the link's in the description, www.monologues.com.au/WMG for World Monologue Games. So please feel free to sign up if you haven't already. We'd love to have you involved. I think while I'm here, I might also point out that there have been a few ineligible submissions sent through. So please, please, please read the terms and conditions and read the instructions carefully, because we don't want to disqualify you. You've gone to a lot of trouble to learn and prepare and film and edit your monologue, and if you send it through to us and it doesn't fit the time limit, which we've had a lot of, so people are submitting to the main category, which is 1 to 2.5 minutes, and they're sending a video that's 3 minutes or 3.5 minutes. We will not accept that, so please don't waste your time. It's a lot of effort to go to. Make sure that you're following these instructions so that we can accept your submission. It's heartbreaking seeing ineligible submissions come through. And a couple of things as well, just some dates. We have the early bird deadline in just over 2 weeks, so on the 25th of May. Now, if you submit by the early bird deadline and get 200 views on your video and include a link, that link I gave before to monologues.com.au/WMG, we will give you a free entry. So if you're keen to try to get that, then submit your videos soon. You've still got time, and then promote them through your social media or your mailing list or whatever. And if you can get 200 views, you just need to contact us and say, Pete, we got 200 views, and you will get a free entry. And then we have our main deadline on the 22nd of June. So if you don't meet the early bird deadline, or if you want to submit multiple entries, which you can, if you purchase extra entries, everyone gets one for free, but you can purchase more. The 22nd of June is the main deadline, and then there is a late deadline a couple of weeks later, but you'll need to pay for an entry if you want to submit late. Okay, so I think that's enough of that. I'm just going to have a quick look at these questions. Use my shed to do a monologue and have a green screen to create a scene. Wow, that's a lot of effort. Jeff, you're welcome to do that. But look, I think the key thing to point out here is that Word Monologue games, it's all about the performance. It's not about the tech, it's not about the backgrounds and stuff, it's not about the set, the costumes. That stuff's all good. Like, I'm not trying to dissuade you from doing it. I think it's great because, you know, it certainly makes the video much more interesting, and maybe it will help enhance your performance. But our judges are very specifically being asked to look at the performance themselves. And the reason is because we want to make this accessible. This is a challenging time with COVID-19 and lockdown, and we want everybody to be able to do this no matter what their circumstances are. So if you don't have high quality equipment, maybe you've just got a phone or a laptop, then we still want you to be able to participate. So as such, we're making sure that the emphasis is really about the performance and not about those other things. But yeah, look, go for it, mate. If you want to give it a try, I would love to see it. I'd love to see how that turns out. All right, guys, look, I don't see any other questions, so thanks very much for joining me again today. I hope you found it useful. Make sure you, if I can give you some homework, if you're still working on your monologue, have a think about writing out a story map, an emotional story map, whatever you want to call it, for your piece, and making sure that you really do think a lot about why you're saying everything that you're saying. Every single word has a meaning to you. Every single sentence does. It means something to you, to your character. It informs your delivery somehow. So putting in that work to really analyze your script and to understand why your character says things in a particular way or feels things in a particular way will help you do a really great performance. All right, guys, thanks again. This was Pete from World Monologue Games. I'll see you next week.